And welcome to Talks of Outcasts. I'm Chris. That's Miles, and we are two pastors talking honestly about life, faith, ministry, and the ridiculous things that happen along the way. So pull up a chair, old Miles. Let's talk.
Yes. I already had a chair pulled up.
I think this time like a metaphorical chair.
Okay. So like, hold on, let me. I just visualized moving the chair up.
There you go.
I'm now ready to engage in conversation. So, hey, how was, I feel like it's different for you because here we are a college town. So our Sundays are different, like because it is the first Sunday back to school.
Yeah, all the kids come back. Yeah.
Yeah. But have you guys started school yet?
Yeah, we actually started a couple of weeks ago.
Wow.
They started like the first week of August.
That's crazy.
Maybe the second week of August. It all starts running together.
It does.
We're in that time of the year where, and you guys understand this, but it's, 104, 105 degrees
Yeah.
with about 300% humidity. And so everything just kind of blends together in one big hot mess.
Yeah.
Well,
it normally isn't humid up here, but it has been lately for some reason, and we don't even have moisture.
I because it's rained a lot this year up there, hasn't there? Hasn't it?
Kind of. It seems like it.
Well, I had forgotten what real humidity feels like. I mean, it does get humid there. I'm not denying that, but you go to certain parts of the country and the humidity is just a whole different deal.
Yeah.
It's just a whole different deal. Now, we don't have the wind that you guys do.
Sure.
But in some ways that makes it worse.
Yeah. No, I'd agree.
I agree the heat worse. So, yeah, we're just kind of trying to hang on by our fingertips, trying to get ready for fall.
Football.
Yeah. Football starts a week from tonight.
Nice.
Yeah.
Chris is super Emmy-winning sports broadcaster for all of our fans that don't know.
That's true. That is true. I'm an award-winning sports broadcaster.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right. When I can actually get the equipment to work. So I actually did a lot of baseball games in the spring, and my biggest problem was I had the worst time just getting the equipment to work. So anyway, I can tell you some stories, but
I couldn't imagine why that is. Yeah. Why that is.
Well,
but you're a pro now. You got it taken care of.
Well, I don't know about that, but yeah.
Well, we had colleges back. We had quite a few college students this Sunday, and so it's been an interesting time for sure. Had a lot of people that we just weren't ready for it. So it was good. So yeah, that's pretty much it, dude. Other than that, it's just a hot 120 degrees for no reason. And
it's not 120.
It definitely feels like it.
Exaggerator.
It definitely feels like it. So
I think that's your superpower.
Exaggerating? Yeah. I am pretty good at it. At what point does it become lying instead of exaggerating? But
let's not start pulling on that thread.
Yeah, okay.
Let's just keep it at exaggerating for the sake of humor.
Yes. That's fair.
Yeah.
Well, all right then. So we talked about last week. So we're still kind of in the same vein. We talked about how to keep from sinning or falling into it.
Yeah. So last week we kind of talked about how do you keep a bad day or a hard season from becoming something that's worse. And so today I want to kind of talk about a little bit different problem and a little bit different issue. And that is the question of what exactly is wrong with me? What exactly is it that I'm struggling with? Because what happens, I think, is that when we go through a hard time or a difficult season, we automatically, well, let me ask you this. So when you go through just a hard time, is your natural reaction to think that it must be something spiritual so that you over-spiritualize it, or do you tend to go the other way where you under-spiritualize it? Because like sometimes sometimes what we think can be a real big life issue or a real big spiritual issue really just means we just need to get a little bit more rest. We need to get a little bit more sleep, or maybe we need to eat more protein in our diet, or whatever the case may be.
Sure. I think for me, I probably under-spiritualize it because that's just my nature.
Yeah.
I'm more of a fixer kind of person, and so what can I be doing to fix the issue? You know what I mean? And so, I really just start to lean the other way, and that causes a whole new problem, a whole new dynamic, for really when sometimes it's just the spiritual side needs to, lock in, I guess is the right term. I'm not really sure. But yeah, I'm more of I'd spend a lot of time, let's just use an example of something at the church was wrong or whatever that is, something like that. I would spend more time fixing the sign, right?
Yeah.
Or those things. And what that would do for me though is it masks what's my problem, like I'm running from my own problem, so I'll find stuff to do. And so that's what I mean by I don't over spiritualize it. I tend to not even go there first. Does that make
Right.
sense?
Yeah.
And so, and I'm an avoider. I'm a procrastinator in every point of my life, like whether it be um, assignments or whether it just be trying to figure out what the next thing to do is. Even in my preaching, like after Acts, where am I going to go? What am I trying to accomplish? Those things. And so I'll spend, and this is my detriment, is I'll spend more time doing things I shouldn't be doing, and not necessarily bad things. And so, but I'm just masking that with activity rather than trying to sit down and figure out what's actually wrong. So what about
Yeah.
you?
I probably tend to over spiritualize it. I tend to probably go in the other direction. I assume, you know, well, maybe this means I'm not saved.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy.
Um,
I didn't know we were
um,
going that deep that fast. Yeah.
and that's where the show took a turn.
Yeah.
No, I tend to, I mean, I can be a bit dramatic, a bit. Um, so I tend to kind of look for these deep problems that may be there, or they really might not be there. Um, I mean, and that's the thing, isn't it? Like sometimes our conscience tells us the truth,
Sure.
right? And it's not always lying to you when it says, um, "Hey, you're guilty of something, or you've
Sure.
done something that has brought this upon yourself." And so, yeah, that's typically where I go.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah. And that's tough. So I guess the question I would ask then is, like, I know you've said this before, and this is kind of what one thing I've always appreciated is like, how do we get down to the gritty part? I mean, because this whole podcast is going to be like, how do we identify what's wrong, right? Or how do we figure out what is wrong? And so I know where you're going to go, but like, let's look at it from both our angles, right? We're complete opposite of the spectrums, right? So you're counseling me and you know who I am. So you know I'm going to try to avoid the spiritual side. So let's start there. Where would you begin to tell me to start to examine, right? Because we're trying to get down to one thing I always appreciate is you laid out like this, or which I know you're not the only one, but like some of the things we do are a result of something that we're not identifying. So what we try to fix are the outlier problems and never the depth of what's really wrong. And so I know you've been in pastoring for over 20 years. And so you've seen both types, or you've probably even seen in the middle here, right? Whether you're one hard way or the other. So just tell us how would you begin to realize, and then how to work into the deeper issues. How do you get to the bottom of the barrel?
so yeah, so you're talking about if you're just dealing with sort of basic, maybe anxiety or depression, or you're just not quite feeling like yourself,
Sure.
right? I mean, you're not talking about a situation where you know for sure, like something's wrong, but but you don't know exactly what it is. Are you talking about that kind of scenario?
I mean, we can do both. We can do with that one. Let's start with that one, because I think the other one is it's a little you can get to the point a little faster, I guess. I don't know, but I think it could be either way. So we could start with, why am I? Because I think that's what you're trying to accomplish, right? Is why am I the way I am, like on certain things or just in general here. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of times if you can get somebody talking, there are certain things that come to light, and then you just sort of pick at them. You just sort of work through them. And so, like, if you come to me and this is what you say to me, I'm gonna talk to you about things like, does God feel distant to you right now? And if God feels distant, well, why is that? Are you? And this is one of the things that you always go back to, and I think it's good that you do. Yeah, I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna ask you. Are you spending time in God's Word? Are you spending time in prayer? Are you putting yourself in a position to where you can hear Him speak through His Word to your heart, right? And so I'm gonna ask you that. I'm gonna talk about or ask you questions like, is it possible that in a certain area of your life, maybe you're dealing with some burnout, and so maybe you just need some rest, or is there something that has happened that is causing you grief? Because sometimes grief can play out like that. Um, and all of these things can exist together in some form or another. And so I think the key to the whole thing, though, is to learn to ask yourself the right questions and be brutally, ruthlessly honest with yourself. And that's hard to do because we all like to pretend that we're better than we are. I like to pretend I'm better than I am. You like to pretend you're better than you are. Our listeners like to pretend they're better than they are. I mean, we all play this game with ourselves of um, giving ourselves, whether we call it giving ourselves the benefit of the doubt, whether we call it looking for excuses. We all sort of play this game with ourselves. And if you don't have the honest, if you don't have the ability to be brutally honest with yourself, ruthlessly honest with yourself, then you're never going to get down to what the real issue is, what the core of the problem is. I can't tell you how many times in counseling somebody you start trying to find the idol, right? Augustine said that our hearts are idol making factories, that all of our hearts have idols. And how quickly, whenever you bring up the issue of, hey, do you think this might be an idol? Like immediately people reject that, like without even giving it a thought. Well, no, 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 no. That's not an idol. Well, no, 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 no. Control's not an idol for me. No, 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 no. Money's not an idol for me. When it's rather obvious that in fact it is an idol for you.
Hmm. Yeah.
And we just have a really hard time being honest with ourselves, like just being really just brutally honest with ourselves.
So how do you? I mean, that's a good point. I feel like when you bring up the idol thing, do you think it's because, like, if you're a Christian, you know the scriptures, Old Testament idol feels like you're gonna burn because you have one? You know what I mean? Just because you hear those that kind of talk in the Old Testament. What makes it so difficult to just admit that, or is it just a simple fact that we're afraid to admit that we're not near as good as we think we are? Or is it, does that, you know what I'm trying to say? Does maybe some of the fear of God maybe comes into that? Like an unhealthy fear. You understand what I'm saying? Not the reverence type, but like, because, I don't know. I don't know if that's what I'm trying to communicate through that. Or is it just the fact that we are just that downright selfish that we can't think that we possibly put something above God? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think I mean, go by all the way back to Genesis 3 in the very first sin, right? So they sin, and what's the first thing they do? God comes looking for them, and what's the first thing they do? They run and they hide and they cover themselves, right? And so that instinct to cover ourselves, goes all the way back to Adam and Eve, and so that's just built into our DNA as a result of sin. Running from God, hiding from ourselves, hiding from one another. It's our natural instinct, especially when we're exposed. But we spend so much of our time and so much of our lives applying makeup, right? Spiritual makeup in order to make ourselves look better than we actually look. And it's why it's why grace doesn't amaze us. It's why the gospel doesn't amaze us because we've convinced ourselves that we're not really all that bad. And I think another thing that factors into it is the way that we think about progress in the Christian life and the way that we think about maturity in the Christian life. Because if progress in the Christian life means that that I'm more victorious over sin, or that I'm winning the sin battle more, or that I'm conquering sin completely, then all of a sudden you realize, wait a minute, I've got this idol in my life. And so what does that say about my progress? If progress is all about this moving forward, I'm climbing the ladder to God, I'm getting closer to God because of my work and my diligence. If all of a sudden this idol's exposed, then what does that say about my progress?
Mm. Yeah.
And the deeper question than that is, what does that say about my salvation?
Yeah. That's fair. So do you well, yeah, that's true. That's true. I'm just trying to figure out how to
But it's so ingrained, and Martin Luther called this the theology of glory versus the theology of the cross. That the theology of glory is man trying to climb this ladder up to God, and through my own work and my own effort and my own um, responsible, good Republican choices, right?
Sure.
I can move closer to God. And of course, Luther, comes back and he says, well, none of that is true. That there's not a day of your life where, you don't desperately need Christ. And there's not a day in your life where repentance shouldn't be a part of that. Like that renewing myself to battle against sin and renewing myself to take up that spiritual sword and put on the spiritual armor and go into battle again, just like I did and just like I've done every day that I've been a believer.
Yeah. So I mean that's I can see that because I definitely fall victim to it. I feel like that was kind of the way youth ministry was for a while, of telling you need to do, and I think they were trying to be helpful. You know what I mean? Trying to teach us how to become, I'll say, good Christian, but what I mean is just learn how to study and how to do those things, and some of that morphed into kind of just naturally, like what you said, is that we're always trying to um, say that we're doing enough, or we're trying to justify that our learning is enough, or whatever. And then I think you're absolutely right, because on the other side of that is then what happens is when you don't meet those quotas or those special places that you put in, now you're asking yourself if you're even a believer. And then you move into that tailspin area. So I mean, so I can see the reason we avoid coming to those places of the idol. I can see how, well, like even in my own life where I don't want to. I think a lot about when Jesus asked the guy at the pool of Bethesda, "Do you even want to be healed?" Sometimes I wonder if that's my own heart. Like, do I really want to let go of some of the, like, that self idol? I mean, I know we can all go to self being an idol, really quickly. But like sometimes I even argue with myself, do I even want to let go of these things? And I think that's having to be brutally honest with yourself when you come to those places, because what God is asking you is to to kill those things, right? To make them go. And so it's a really hard place to get to. And then it's like, well, once you get there, what do I do now? So, you know what I'm saying? How do you begin to start to, I'll say fix, but I think you know what I mean, because obviously we're relying on the Spirit. But how do we continue? How do we press into? How do we press on, or whatever it is that once you've identified the bottom, right, of the barrel of who you are, what now? Like,
Yeah.
where would you, I mean, where would you go? Because I think for me, knowing myself and knowing that I'm a fixer, like I try to fix things and not really, I just, a lot of ways I handle my life like my stepdad used to handle junky houses, right? Where where if you're not a carpenter, then just generality here. Trim fixes a lot of things. Trim covers up all the imperfections that someone like me has just completely ruined your house. But let me tell you what, I can put some trim up, and you're like, oh, it's not that bad. Um, so how do you help someone like me not just start band-aiding the fix? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
How do you begin to help me to take things apart? Actually spend the time once you're in the bottom of what's wrong. What do you do now?
Well, I think some of it is the difference between conviction and condemnation, because conviction, um, when you're when the Spirit brings conviction into your heart, He is exposing your sin, He's revealing your sin, and then He's pointing you to Christ, and it's a way of reminding you that Christ atoned for this, Christ paid for this, um, and therefore return back to Christ, return back to the cross, return back to that. Condemnation, on the other hand, accuses you of sin, and then it acts as though the door to Christ has been locked forever, right? So, in answer to your question, when I've gone through this process and I've realized, hey, there's real sin here, and now what do I do? Well, you confess it. You go to God and you tell God what you did, right? And you don't pull punches. It doesn't turn into, well, God, that woman you gave me, to quote Adam in Genesis 3, or you're not making excuses. You're not saying, well, they did it to me first, or if they hadn't have done this, then I would be more willing to forgive, or you confess it to God, and you pick up your sword and you go back to fighting against it. And I think it really is that simple. You confess it. You thank God that He sent His Son to die for you. So you remind yourself that of the gospel. You remind yourself that salvation is not depending upon you. And you pick up your sword and you go back and you fight it again and you keep doing it. I think it really is that simple. I don't, I mean, of course, I mean, we can talk about, depending on what the particular sin is or what the particular issue is. Of course, you think through ways, okay, so when am I most susceptible to this? Or what's the context where I'm more likely to fall into this? And how can I work things to where maybe I'm not tempted in the same way that I was, or don't put myself in those positions again. And I think all of that is good, and I think all of it is wise. But that's not what we trust in, and that's not what we ultimately depend on. Um, yeah.
Well, no, just kidding.
Well, you've listened to Talks of Outcast, and
Yeah, we 20-minute episode today.
were you really
Um,
checking your watch when I was talking?
no, someone was calling me.
Okay,
That's
I
the
got
bad
you.
thing
You
about
got
these smartwatches and things is that I'm a distraction kind of person, so it
uh-huh.
got me.
No,
Um,
I feel you.
yeah, and so okay, so conviction versus condemnation. Well, how do you keep yourself from maybe you already answered this, but how do you keep yourself from taking conviction and then just bashing yourself? Because I think we can get to this space as well where I'm going to try to do tangible things to fix it. But I also know people who, once they find their spot of where they're so bad, that they get to just kill themselves over it. You know what I'm saying? Like they start to just get to where they can't let go and trust into the gospel. You know what I'm saying? Where all of a sudden they're in self-pity, loathing even, uh, and not knowing how to, to trust in the grace side. and to say that, you know what I mean? Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, so
Yeah.
is it the same? Is it the same principle? Which I guess it is, but how, give me some tangible things here. Like like, I know what you mean by like certain place or time. So if I have a problem with lust or, Jesus calling it adultery. So I'm struggling there. There's going to be things, right? I understand what you mean. Like, hey, certain times a day, you should probably put your phone in the drawer or not be, wherever these places are that cause you those struggles, which I understand. And so what about cause if you're the other way, like, um, my son, and I'm not going to say anything bad, but like when he gets in trouble, he doesn't think of how he can get out of it. He devolves and gets worse. You're not like he's doing worse, but like he just melts down, like just catastrophe is stricken. You know what I mean?
Right.
And he's a teenager, so I know some of this is just normal teenage drama, right? But I think you know as well as I do that there's even times in my life when God is dealing with me and I'm acting like that, where I'm completely perplexed and don't know what to do. So, is it the same type of thing? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
Yeah, and you know what's crazy about that is that you know what the root of that is? The root of that is pride.
Sure.
It's not usually what we think of when we think of pride, because usually we think of the person who is filled with arrogance and looks down on everybody. But the person who thinks of themselves as a constant loser and the person that feels sorry for themselves and all, I mean, it's still, being inward in your thinking. It's still thinking about yourself. It's just the opposite of what we think of as the person who is arrogant, where one boasts himself up, the other one puts himself down, but they're both still thinking about themselves. I mean, they're both turned inward on their thoughts. Um, yeah, sorry, I'm getting older. What was the question exactly?
No, I think
Sorry.
it took me a long time. I'm the king of asking a 30-minute question. So,
Well, you're not the king.
well,
I
I
think we
know
both know
there
who the
is
king
there is
is.
one other
That's a
that,
little inside joke that our
yeah,
listeners might not know. But ask old Miles what that means, and he'll tell you.
yeah,
And then ask him about the king of the 30-minute question and the king of the 45-minute answer.
that's right. One
Yeah.
of these days, one of these days. Um, I guess that answers it. I mean, they're both pride. Like, it's how do you get out of that? Like, how do you get out of that part of it? But you kind of just answered it by saying essentially you're doing the same thing. Is well, not really. How do you get out of the crushing weight of condemnation? Like when you're in that self pity mode or at the bottom of yourself. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like I
Yeah.
know. Anyways, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I mean, this answer is not going to surprise you, but you go back to the gospel. The gospel attacks pride from both sides, because it says to the arrogant person, you're not that great and you're not that special. And in fact, you're so wicked that only the death of Christ could save you, right? Which brings the arrogant person low. And then it says to the person whose pride expresses itself as self-pity and I'm such a loser, etc. It says to them, you are so valuable that the king of the universe sent his son to die for you, and so that must mean that you have worth, and it must mean that you have value, and therefore you are not a loser, and therefore you are not the lowest of the low. So the gospel actually kind of works on both ends of it, um, and I I don't want to always come back to the same thing, but I can't help it, because I really do think that this is the answer. You have to go back to the cross, and you have to go back to the fact that the King of Kings allowed himself to be beaten, allowed himself to be humiliated, allowed himself to die a criminal's death in the most horrifying way, um, for the joy set before him, according to Hebrews. And you've heard me say this before. What was the joy set before him? What did he have after the cross that he didn't have before the cross? Well, what he didn't have before the cross was his people. He didn't have you. And so he went to the cross and he went through all of that for you. And so that must mean that you have value, and that must mean that you have worth.
Yeah, man, that's it. I think
Now, having said all of that, for me, the difficult thing is in remembering it because I get caught up in these self-pity things and these self-pity thoughts and, woe is me, et cetera, et cetera. And so I need to have people around me that can spot that quickly and who can call it out. I've got a couple of guys here on staff that are really good at that. And, we've talked about that. I've got a guy on staff who's very quick to say, well, Chris, I think that might be your flesh talking. I mean, just and it's exactly what I need to hear in those moments is that okay, well your identity is not based upon what this person thinks about you or you are more than, whatever this particular failure, bad moment says that you are, right? Like, so I need to have people around me that are willing to say that in those moments because it serves as an automatic reminder that my feelings and my heart sometimes lies to me, right? And the heart is deceitfully wicked above all things. Who can possibly know their own heart? The prophet Jeremiah asked.
oh, I thought you were gonna keep going with that.
Nah,
You wound yourself up and then stopped. So,
yeah.
um,
Who's calling you now?
that was a text. My
Oh,
wife, by the way.
oh, oh.
And so okay, so there's that. Okay, then we're gonna switch gears. I think a lot of times the idea of preaching the gospel to ourselves, that's why it needs to be a daily thing. I mean, even in the good times, even when you're not in those valleys, it's still good to teach yourself the gospel on a constant because it becomes a place of where you realize lots of things, whether you realize you're more wicked than you think you are, or you're more valuable, or whatever that may be. It's a good practice just to continue into, right? And
Yes.
so those are the hard things. Now let's switch gears a little bit and talk about because you said burnout earlier, which I hate that word. Um,
Why?
but I because I just don't like it.
Well, as long as you have a well thought out reason.
Yes. Well, I have a well thought out reason, but I know you and I don't see it the same way. So, um, there are things that then okay, well, if we talk about burnout, because I have a hard time with that word because um, I understand being tired and all those things, but if you're doing kingdom work, I have a hard time understanding that burnout. I can understand being tired and exhausted and those things, but can we burn out doing what God has called us to do and those types of things? I don't know. That's another conversation for another time. But for the sake of this podcast, let's say that there is the person who is they're not so much struggling with that side of things where they're in the bottom of the barrel, whether they're too prideful in either direction, right? But they are just so overwhelmed in the other side of things where they feel that verge of burnt out. And I know I just probably made a whole lot of people mad by saying I don't think you can use that kind of language. But what do you do? Like how do you start to work through that side of ministry as well? I think that um if that makes any sense, does that I don't know if
When
that
you're
question
exhausted?
I guess, I don't know. You said something earlier about finding out what's wrong with you, and there's this side of it, the bad sin side where you're full of maybe you're in your sin. But then there's the other side I think where you just and maybe it is the same thing because sometimes I feel like all we're doing is um in this constant state of circling. Like nothing is changing. And that is like the overall church or just maybe myself where I am praying, I am reading, I'm seeking God daily. I'm waiting for him to do amazing things. And by amazing, I don't mean my church is going to be full or whatever. Whatever it is, God's, I'm just waiting for God to do something. And then you get into a place where you feel like you're in that cycle over and over and over and over and over, and nothing is changing. And you start to ask that same question: what is wrong with me? Right? Or what is
Right.
wrong with this situation? So how do we view that? Is there a place where maybe God's just telling you to rest, or you know what I mean? You get where I'm going?
Yeah, I mean, I think napping is a spiritual discipline. Um,
Yes.
um, I do think I think sometimes things are a lot of good comes from just taking an afternoon and just going to go play a nice round of froth with your buddies,
Yes.
right? I mean, I actually think those kinds of things actually help a great deal, you know, where you can just get away from it for a little bit. Think about something else. You know, just, you know, enjoy a good laugh, you know, with your friends. I think that is really helpful. I think another thing is that at some point you have to have faith in what God has said, and what God has said is that He is always working. He has said that His word would not return empty, but that it would accomplish exactly what He intends for it to accomplish. And sometimes that means that you're going to see it. And sometimes that means, in fact, in my experience, I think more often it means that you're not going to see it, but you accept by faith that God is working in places that you don't know and doing things that you can't see, and that growth is very slow. It's very slow in our lives, and it's very slow in the people who attend our church's lives, and it's very hard to see um, in short amounts of time. And so you have to have faith that you are doing what it is that God has called you to do, not just in the sense of your vocation, but in the sense of your daily practices, the aim of your ministry, the purpose of your ministry, the goal of your ministry, where you spend your time in your ministry. You have to have faith that what you're doing is in fact what the scripture has called you to do. And then once that is settled, that you're doing that to the best of your ability, you have to just be able to trust and leave it up to God, because you can't do it anyway. I mean, you know, if I could open up people's heads and all of a sudden just, you know, from a Kool-Aid pitcher, you know, just pour in the fruits of the spirit, I certainly would do it. But I can't. I can't force that. I can guilt people, I can manipulate people, but that's not real spiritual growth anyway. That's just teaching people how to cover up who they really are. And so the only thing that I can do is be faithful to the task that I'm called to, and trust that God is moving even when I can't see what He's doing. I don't have a magic answer for that, because I
Mhm.
don't think a magic answer really exists. I think fundamentally at the end of the day, we too are called to be men of faith and men who trust in what God's word says, as opposed to trusting in what our eyes say or what our ears hear.
Yeah.
Because if you trust in what your eyes see, and when you trust in what your ears hear, you know, for the overwhelming majority of us who are involved in ministry, you're going to quit because of discouragement.
Mm.
There are very few um, Billy Grahams and Matt Chandlers. You know, most of us don't have a ministry that looks like that.
Sure.
And, you know, praise the Lord when He moves like that, even if it's not in my area or in my church. But for most of us, it's not going to look like that. It's going to look like from an outside perspective, it's going to look like a very quiet life filled with a lot of very mundane type days. You know, I'm fixing the church sign, right?
Sure.
Or for me, I'm meeting with a committee to talk about, you know, changing the carpet in the sanctuary. You know, or I'm having discussions with my staff about, you know, why hasn't the city emptied out our dumpster, right? Most days are going to be very, very ordinary, and I think it calls for a great deal of faith to be able to say, God, you have called me to this. I'm going to stick to this. I'm not going to quit doing this. even if I can't ever see a single result. Now, we've all seen more than one result.
Sure.
You've seen more than one result. I've seen more than one result. But God, even if I never see a single sign that you're actually working, I am going to devote myself to this, and I'm going to commit myself to this because this is what you've called me to do. The results are up to you. What's up to me is my own faithfulness and my own diligence, and so that's where I'm going to land.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I was just sitting here thinking, uh, and this, I don't know. I just was thinking this thought is, do you think that the the believer should, and maybe just minister, I don't know, should almost pour themselves almost all the way out daily? Or is this something not in an, I don't know how else to say it. Just to give all you got for the day. You know what I'm saying? Um, cause I look at how I've done ministry, and I look at my little brother who's, moving to Africa, and he's in lots of ways, he's doing too much in my mind, right? Like, for someone who's getting ready to make a major life change, he's not slowed down at all to like say goodbye or nothing like that. Like, um, hands to the plow, look back. I mean, he just does what he's supposed to do, and he feels that way. And I look at it, and there are times where he feels like what you just said, but there are other times where I see him just enjoy ministry so much that it's kind of captivating, or even I don't get jealous of it, but I'm like, man, I can remember being that way, and uh, parts of me I feel like are a detriment. Not, I don't know. I don't want to say I've matured, but it feels like in maturing, I've also got a little more relaxed, or I don't do as much as I should, or you know what I'm saying? I don't know if that's the right type of thing. Um, because I just watch people do ministry, and we all do it our own different ways. We're all unique and all those things. And so, like, maybe your day pouring yourself out is in writing your materials and studying and doing those things where, it looks different for everybody. Is that a dangerous thought? To be, you know what I mean? When I say, when I pour out all I have in one day, each day, every day, is that a dangerous place to be? What would you tell a young man like me, looking at ministry? Obviously you've done it for a long time. So even just a church member, right? Because there is that same weight of, man, I just did a 40-hour week. I know there's things going on at the church. I know I could help, but you know, you know what I mean? So what would you say?
Is your brother married?
Yes, with a kid.
Okay. He does have a child?
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a hard question for me to answer because every time I take a break, like I can take a break for a certain length of time and then I start feeling guilty about
Sure.
not working. And I haven't really pulled at that thread very much because I guess part of me is really afraid that it's not going to end well.
Sure. Sure.
I like to be productive. I remember when I was a kid, I had older people in my life that accused me of being lazy,
Sure.
and so those comments have always really stuck in my mind. Not to mention, the old joke about the preacher only works one day a week. Like I think there are people who really feel that way. That what we do is not really work, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Um, and so there's a real part of me that in a real desire to prove that I can work just as hard and just as long as they can. Um, and that's not healthy. I'm not saying that's good.
Sure.
I'm just being honest and real about, how I think about these things and how I process them. I wouldn't, I guess it somewhat depends on what you mean exactly by pouring yourself out. If you mean that you ignore your family and you ignore your wife and you ignore your kids and you ignore your community, then I would say, no, I don't think that's good. But if you were to say, well, it doesn't mean that, but maybe it means giving your all and giving your best, then I would say, yes, I do agree with that. That in the time that we have available to us, and look, and you mentioned it, ministry is going to look different everywhere you go, even with your basic personality and even with your particular gifts. You can minister in one context, and the ministry in that context is going to look different than the ministry in another context. Just in your own life, as you've transitioned from collegiate ministry into the pastorate in the same community. I mean, your office has moved what, 3 blocks? But in terms of the context of your ministry and the way that ministry really, what it really looks like, I'm sure that it's way different.
Sure.
Um, and so some of that is just adapting to the context that you're in.
Yeah.
And so I think we need to be really, really careful. And this is not what you're saying, and this is not what you're doing. It's just a thought that comes to my mind. I think we need to be really, really careful that we don't look at someone else's ministry and make assumptions about how hard they
Sure.
work or about whether or not they're using their time wisely.
Sure.
We need to be really, really careful because really for you and I, what do you do that's not at least in some way connected to ministry?
Sure.
If you don't take care of your family and your wife leaves you, then that's going to be a real problem for your church, just like it's going to be a real problem for my church. If if you have the chance to go play a round of golf or froth
Hmm.
with someone who's not a believer, and you have the opportunity to have a gospel conversation with them in the context of playing golf, then why wouldn't you do that? I mean, that's ministry. People roll their eyes when we say things like that, but it's absolutely the truth. If you take an afternoon and if you go to the local coffee shop and you just take your laptop and you're just mindful of opportunities to engage in conversations with people in your community, well, that's ministry. So I just think that what we're called to is to do and to give God our very best, that we're not giving him leftovers or we're not giving him sloppy, we're not doing sloppy work in whatever context that that you find yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes I think about it and, I don't know. I meet with a lot of younger men today that will leave at a time. Like they just have set times in their mind and then they're done, you know? And I guess the hard part for me is, my pastor who trained me, he may have went home at a time, but he still did ministry. Like it never shut off. It was, and he loved his family well. So I know people are thinking that I'm not negating the family. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not even going to go and say that that's what he did. I mean, I have no idea how his kids felt, so I can't, maybe they did feel that way. I don't know. Um, but like, I know I especially going from the college setting and now even into this setting, uh, it just feels like ministry becomes a place of, and not just they're pastors, they're not, they're whatever, not just pastors, but just church members as well. But it's like, oh, I can only do this for a certain amount of time and then I have to go do something else. You know what I mean? Like we've made ministry compartmentalized like we would our job. Does that make sense? And so it's just tough, um, to think how you get out of that or how am I going too far or whatever in that space? Um, and then translating that into your church or people, I guess. I don't know. It's just something I've been thinking about a lot lately and just trying to discover what my problems are, because sometimes that is a problem. Like, am I just not doing ministry because I feel like I don't have to because I'm working, am I being a Christian at work? Am I not being a Christian at work? You know what I'm saying? Those types of questions are still in the background of my mind as well, and just trying to flesh all that out. So maybe that didn't take our podcast anywhere, but it was bothering me. So um,
Yes.
yes, yeah, I don't know. So
I
that
don't have a response.
yeah, I know you don't.
No, but I think to some degree that's something that we all wrestle with and that we all struggle with. And I don't, the young men that I know, I think one of the things that's good about them, we have a couple of young men on our staff here who are early 30s, and they view ministry in a lot of ways very differently than I do.
sure,
And I don't think that's necessarily bad. In fact, in a lot of ways, I admire both of them for the commitment that they've made to their family. And I wish that when my kids were smaller, that I had had more of that kind of resolve. Sometimes when you're in the middle of something, you don't see it.
sure, sure,
And you don't see it until you look back on it with time and with hopefully wisdom and experience, but you don't see it in the moment. And so I really I do respect them for their commitments to their family. At the same time, I do struggle with, are they really giving their ministry their all? And at the end of the day, that's not really for me to decide. If they are if they are doing what, in my context, if they're doing what the church requires of them, even if my own thought is that we should go above and beyond, if they're doing what the church requires them to do, then I don't want to be the voice that comes along and says, "You're doing this wrong." Does that make sense? I mean,
yeah,
now if they're making mistakes, if
sure,
if if things aren't
sure,
getting done, that's a different conversation. But
sure,
if things are getting done, even if I think sometimes they could do more, it's certainly not my place to tell them, "Hey, family doesn't need to be as big a commitment in your life as it is,"
sure,
right? That
sure,
that that would be overstepping. That would be
sure,
wrong. And I just think that with a lot of the young men that I know, I do admire their desire to have healthy and strong families.
sure, sure,
I don't know that I've ever said this to you, but I always really admired your commitment to family worship, and doing that and being consistent with it, because it wasn't something that we were consistent with, and that's not the fault of my wife. That's the fault of myself
sure,
that we weren't consistent there. And I've got, young families here who are really committed to doing family worship, and they do it every single night. In fact, this summer we did several Wednesday nights in July where we modeled that, where we had dinner together at 5:30, and then at 6 we all went into the sanctuary, where those guys who do that on a regular basis with their family modeled it for the rest of the church and anyone who wanted to be a part of it. And it was really kind of a cool thing. And so now we hear of other families that are taking on that practice, and I really really admire that, and I think that is a good thing. um so yeah, I just, not everyone's going to do it like me. Not everyone's going to do it like you. And I think we have to have grace for one another.
sure,
Um,
sure,
you know,
yeah,
but at the same time, there's a real job aspect to this, that this is how you make your living. And so the church, if they're going to pay you a full-time salary to where you don't have to work outside the church, then the church has the right to expect certain things.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
and so in that ways, in that way, it's very much like any other job.
Yeah. I think I guess where I would finish, because I could keep going, but um is even in like leading people, I think it exposes who you are more often than you think. Like even right now, as I was thinking about what I just said, a lot of this is some of the issues that I have dwelling inside of me of maybe adequacy or whatever it is. And then I stem that out to other people. Um, you know what I mean? Where I'm holding other people to some of the things that I was held to that wasn't necessarily right or wrong, one way or the other, but also realizing that there's still some stuff in there that God is dealing with in me. And so that's one thing that I would say, that it never change. Like you're always should be learning. You're always watching. Really, God shows you when you think you know who you are, God reveals something else about yourself. And so you really begin to just continually fall back with that God is far more sufficient than you will ever know. God is far more stable. God is everything and everything that you'll ever need. And I think it's just a constant thing that we find ourselves, whether we're in the bottom of the barrel with despair or self-pity or arrogance, or if we feel like we're just spinning the wheels, that it's just God who is ultimately still in control. God is still working and moving and doing all those things around us. And sometimes it is, we need to be still and see him. And sometimes it's repentance, and sometimes it's just relying, you know what I mean? In those things. And so I guess that's where we finish. Um, so we hope at least this helped a little bit. I mean, I don't know. It's kind of a tough thing because there are days I know exactly where I am and who I am, and there are days I don't.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so this is the constant struggle sometime as a Christian. And when bad things are happening, it's always something going, it's something that plays into this in a lot of ways. And so what's wrong with you is that you're a sinner and you need Jesus.
Yep. That's right.
And we want you to know that there is a God out there, who sent his son and died for you, and to show that sin can be forgiven.
Amen.
Through his blood and through his sacrifice. And so if nothing else, remind yourself of that every day, and trust in it, and put your hope there. Yeah. All right. Well, Chris, always a joy.
We always have such happy and uplifting conversations, don't we?
Maybe the next episode we'll pretend like we're happy or something. I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm not a collegiate minister anymore. The happiness has been placed deep down in the heart.
Yes, indeed.
Yes. I got to be more stoic and serious.
Yes. And hold your hands like this a lot.
Just the whole time. Yeah. All right. Well, we hope you guys enjoy this. We'll see you next week.